The first part of Jeremy Hunt's budget on Wednesday didn't stand out too much to me. We didn't mention it on the show we did about the budget, but it got lots of people fuming. It was this.
As we mourn the tragic loss of life in Israel and Gaza, the Prime Minister reminded us last week of the need to fight extremism and heal divisions. So I start today by remembering the Muslims who died in 2 world wars in the service of freedom and democracy. We need a memorial to honour them. So following representations from the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove and others, I've decided to allocate £1 million towards the cost of building one. Whatever your faith or colour or class, this country will never forget the sacrifices made for our future.
So Hunt referred there to representations from the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove. Now, that's the former Chancellor, Sajid Javid, who last month led calls for a Muslim war memorial. Now, the campaign for a memorial was begun in 2015 by the World Wars Muslims Memorial Trust. Before Hunt's budget, they had already received permission to put up a memorial to Muslim soldiers in the National Memoriam Arboretum. That's a word I learned today, an arboretum. So that's a botanical garden for trees. And in this case, it contains memorials for the armed forces, civilian organisations and voluntary bodies who have played a part in serving the country during war. So the group had permission to put up the monument, the memorial, but they didn't have the funding required. They were looking to raise £1 million to build the memorial, for which they already had permission, and that's where the Chancellor stepped in. So he said, I will cough up the £1 million so this can be built. So far, so good, but not for many right-wingers on Twitter. Right-wing blowhard Lawrence Fox said, quote, "At last a statue we can desecrate." The baton was picked up by Nigel Farage on GB News.
Over 100 years ago, we had men of more brain and foresight than our Chancellor. They decided at the end of the First World War, and we continued it throughout World War II as well, that everybody, regardless of race, rank or religion, would be buried beneath the same headstone. The principle was equality in death, recognising the contribution of all. And indeed, if you go to a big Commonwealth war grave cemetery in France or elsewhere, what you'll see is a stone of remembrance that says, for those of all faiths and none. We thought about this over 100 years ago. We do not need Jeremy Hunt putting forward the idea of a memorial to a specific religion. It is just plain wrong. I feel very strongly about this.
That was a popular point of view in the GB News studio, and Nigel Farage said he feels very strongly about this. But he clearly hasn't done his research. So for a start, no one is buried at the National Memorial Arboretum. It's a bit of a national park set aside for war memorials, and it already has monuments to lots of different groups. So there is a memorial for Jewish servicemen and women, of course. There's one for Sikhs who served, and one for the Polish people who fought alongside Britain in World War II. And that's among 400 memorials. There is also one for a particular warship's cat. So a cat got a memorial. So Nigel Farage's point is frankly nonsense, right? The idea that Jeremy Hunt has introduced this idea that religions should have their own memorials in this sort of very large national park, they do, right? It's not saying that, we need to chop up the cenotaph. It doesn't seem too outrageous to me. He wasn't the only one who was annoyed. This was Michelle Dewberry's take.
I cannot for the life of me understand who on earth briefed Jeremy Hunt to say, do you know what? I know what we're going to do. Right at the very start of the budget, we're going to, tell people how we're going to change their lives for the better financially. I know what we're going to do. We're going to announce a memorial. I think it's absolutely absurd. And if it is indeed tagged to this notion of quelling extremism, what kind of extremist is going to sit there 1 minute thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to blow up an arena full of kids. Whoa, now weren't. There's a statue. I mean, it's absolutely nonsensical.
So in her defence, Michelle Dewberry was moaning about this being a gimmicky way to start a budget. So that's, not entirely false. I think what Farage said was entirely false. I think what Michelle Dewberry said, wasn't completely unreasonable. But her audience were absolutely fuming.
I was sat watching the budget this afternoon and I was gobsmacked when I saw war memorial for Muslims was going to be, shall we put it, £1 million reserved for them for that? Mm-hmm. When I own war memorials, are getting torn down. Disrespect is shown to our memorials. Where does that leave us? I won't hold back because I am furious. I do believe that money should have gone to our war veterans or put some more of our war memorials in place for our people.
Thank you. I just find it such an odd. Can I ask a question? I know. I think she's furious, and I think a lot of people are. I mean, I might not be on to much here, but is there anyone in this room that actually thinks that was the right move, that celebrates that? And I don't want you, because I know there's a big strength of feeling that there's a lot of people that are anti that, but it's perfectly valid to be of the opposite persuasion and think it's a good idea. So can I just ask genuinely, is there anybody that thinks that is a good idea, that welcomes that? I'm trying really hard. Anyone at all? Please don't be shy, because I want... No?
Now, from a cursory glance around the room, it didn't look as if there were any Muslims there, although, I haven't seen Muslims jumping up for joy about this particular announcement. Potentially it is gimmicky, but I don't think it's outrageous. Aaron, you were there in Whitehaven. You were in that room with those people who were fuming about this announcement. Do you think this was all a big misunderstanding? I think people sort of seem to think this would have been the first ever memorial to a religious group who served and would be in the centre of London, not in this national park where there already are loads of memorials to different religious groups and different voluntary groups and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we're going to replace Nelson's column with this, this new memorial to Muslim service personnel. I think it's important to say that what Nigel Farage and what Michelle Dewberry was saying were different. I think I agree with her anyway, that it was bizarre to talk about something which is going to cost £1 million at the top of a budget. We are in this country, like a £2.3 trillion economy, sixth largest economy in the world. You're talking about this thing which is going to cost £1 million. It's just kind of weird. Bolting it onto extremism, I think, is also kind of weird. Muslims I know, I saw this on Twitter as well. They're like, well, we don't want this. Like, as if this is the number one ask for British Muslims, which is, many, many people in this country now. I think it's about 8% of the population is Muslim. Significant numbers of people. So, millions, more than 1 million. So I think probably about 1 million plus. So I doubt many of them would say, our number one demand, we're going to have such prominence as a community is to have a war memorial for Muslims. And I also think that, look, there's 2 points of disagreement here. I think most people don't, knock yourself out, build what you want. And the point is it's getting public funding, which is what these people seem to be incensed by. Going on to what Farage said, that's, like you say, it's just completely inaccurate. You've got the Chatri Memorial as well, Michael, which is commemorating Hindus and Sikh service personnel. You have a number of memorials which I've seen. I remember seeing one in Gravesend, which was for Sikh service personnel. The Polish thing is separate because, they had their own division or, a cat that dies on a ship or whatever. But we do absolutely have the Jewish one as well. We do absolutely have memorials to certain people of certain faiths. I don't really see the point of that, actually. I think, where you have the tomb for the fallen soldier or the unknown soldier is a trope in many, many cultures. The idea that, hundreds of thousands or millions of people died and this represents all of them, I think is a very powerful motif. But regardless, if people want to build a memorial for Muslim service personnel who died during the First and Second World Wars, knock yourself out. And it is important to say, Michael, against that lady, the final lady, who I think was just making a racist point, frankly. I don't think, necessarily. I think Nigel Farage, I'm sure he does know there are memorials to other religious minorities. I think Michelle's point had nothing to do with race. I actually agree with it. The politics of it, the optics of it, which is very strange. But what that final lady said was just a racist point, I think, at the end, where she's saying, well, we should have more memorials for us and not for them. In the Second World War, Michael, the Indian Army was hugely important, the war effort. It was the largest volunteer army in human history, and they fought for the British Empire. And of course, many people within that army were Muslim. So I think what that final lady didn't seem to understand is that, yes, there were many Muslims who died fighting for the British Empire in the First and Second World War. Many, many, many Muslims. We often don't think about this. It's certainly not reflected in portrayals of the First and Second World War. In the First World War, I think hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese fought for the French. Of course, at that time, it was a French colony, French Indochina. And of course, there was not that long ago, Lawrence Fox was commenting, I think, on seeing a Sikh or a Muslim soldier in some film, which was portraying the First World War. And he was saying how ridiculous this was. And people were saying, well, actually, if it was being historically accurate, you would have seen far more than just one chap. So there's a few points being made here. And I think, look, commemorating non-white people who fought for the British Empire is obvious because it's simply what happened. But the idea that you commemorate certain people of one religion or another, I mean, I personally, I sort of don't see the point. Michael, if there was World War III, if Uncle Joe Biden took us into World War III against Putin, and you and I both were called up and we were both killed, I would like us to be commemorated by the same memorial, Michael. I wouldn't want one for British Iranians and one for white British people. I think that's actually quite toxic. But regardless, look, if civil society organisations want to do this, good luck to them.
Everyone should be buried in the same place. Your big national memorial should obviously be for everyone who died in the war. But I suppose it seems to me, obviously I hadn't heard of this national, I can't even pronounce the word now. It's not on my autocue, arboretum, something like that. A place with trees. It doesn't seem to me that there's, it's not a graveyard. It is a place where I suppose I think you go on like school trips or people go on a day out and then they walk around and they look at all the various different monuments. And the whole point of each monument, I assume, is that you sort of think about a different part of the war. Oh, right, this is for the Polish people who fought in the war. This is for that cat that died on a warship. I assume each one has a bit of a different story, and that makes it more interesting to walk around and saying, this is another monument for every single person that died. This is another monument for every single person that died. This is no, I suppose it just breaks it up a little bit. Seems reasonable to me, but probably was a bit gimmicky to start a budget with.